Okay, I'm going to get started with our next class here. Today we're talking about what is often considered a bit of a thorny topic. It's one that at times I think maybe I should just ignore. Um, the reason is I will have to say some things that may appear to be critical of other individuals. Now, I don't mean them to be that way, honestly, I don't. Then the fact that the problems are out there does not mean that I'm directing them at any specific person, group, or organization. So, with that having been said, what I want to talk to today is about missionaries, missionary organizations, and missionary conflict. Remember, I told you that the missionary ministry or profession is the one that has the highest attrition rate of anywhere in the world. And everybody says, "Wow, why is that?" Well, primarily it radicates in two things. One is a failure to adapt to the local culture, which is why I've emphasized so much becoming comfortable with investigating and researching, coming to understand, adapting to, and learning to live with and in that local culture. Because if you don't do that, you'll fail. You will come home burnt out, discouraged, feeling like you failed maybe the Lord and yourself and your churches, everything. So I've emphasized that pretty heavily. The other reason that so many missionaries come back is conflict, especially with other missionaries. Now, there's a joke. Tell you a joke this morning. Instead of a story, I'll start out with a joke. Do you know why missionaries should always drive Hondas? Honda cars? Well, the answer is that's the only way you're ever going to get 5 missionaries into one accord. Yeah, I know, sick joke, but that's okay. You don't typically get missionaries in one accord, and the reason is missionaries are very dynamic people. They are very highly motivated people. They're very committed people. Uh, uh, they're very aggressive in some ways as far as getting things done, and all they have to be, or they would not ever make it to the mission field. And so, with all of those characteristics, you can probably figure out pretty quickly. You put 2 together, you're probably going to have conflict. You put 3 or 4 together, you're definitely going to have conflict. And 5 and above, it's a given. Uh, in fact, missionary conflict has been listed in many organizations as the primary reason that people quit and come home. Now, not quite so much among our churches because we still have a lot of our missionaries going out as independent direct support missionaries. And so that pretty much eliminates that problem or certainly reduces it. You may have a little bit of conflict with somebody else in your area, but you simply work a little more independent from them, perhaps, things of that nature. And so that's the reason in our brotherhood this is not perhaps the primary one, although more and more as more of our younger missionaries are going out with groups, it will probably increase as far as being a more significant cause, and will probably eventually become the first as if this trend continues for more and more missionaries to go out with an organization. Now, what are the advantages of going out with an organization? And I'm going to present it pretty much from their point of view. If I had a good close friend that I could call to have them come up and do it, I'd let them do it just simply to be totally fair to them and let them present their case. But I don't have that at the moment, at least not readily available, and so I will try to do it for them. The person who proposes that we go out as part of a missionary organization says, well, they'll help you raise support. They will do the screening and all that to make sure that you don't have some sort of a personality issue or mental health issue. They will help you do a lot of the paperwork for getting to the field and getting established there, all of that type of thing. They'll give you the orientations to what you need and all that. Then when you get there, they'll plug you right into a ministry so you don't have to flail around and look for one. They often say we'll help with financial accountability by doing your accounting for you or by at least receiving your financial report and then sending it out to the churches, things of that nature. They also say, well, if we go out as a group, we can encourage one another. We can help one another. And there is something to be said for that. Now, what are the problems with that? Well, the problems are conflict, as I mentioned, because if you have an organization, somebody's got to be the big shot. And that person that's a big shot probably thinks, I'm the big shot, and I have a right to give orders and tell other people what to do. And pretty soon somebody says, well, I don't feel like I should be doing that, or I don't feel like I want to be doing that, or I don't feel like I can be doing that. And yet you're being told to do it. The other reasons are things like simply personality conflict. We don't get along. The old saying, if I don't get along with you, you don't get along with me. It may be me or it may be you. Or it may be really neither. It's just that we have two different personality types that won't mesh. But if it reaches a point where I can't get along with you or that guy over there or the person over there or the other one or whatever, pretty soon you have pretty obvious problems with me. But generally speaking, those interpersonal conflicts are personality clashes. Your personality simply doesn't mesh with theirs. And that's not going to happen all that often. And that's why it's so hard to build up a truly good functioning team. Second problem with going out as a group or going out as part of a group, you're going to have meetings to talk about what you're going to do. And if you have a group of Americans together having meetings and talking about what they're going to do, that almost automatically starts to exclude the nationals. You're probably going to be talking English because maybe not everybody there is totally fluent in the local language. You're probably going to be making plans based upon support and issues like that the locals have no interaction with. And so the fact that you're going out as an organization almost always sets you apart as a group and puts the nationals over here as a different group. And so it becomes an impedance to being able to share the gospel and witness many times because you exclude yourselves from them. You talk about American things, you do American activities, you share American interests. All of that type of stuff means that you're less involved with the nationals. So for those reasons, the missionary organization is not the panacea that it is sometimes presented or proposed as far as being the solution to all of our problems. In fact, if you go back into the early days of the Restoration Movement, it was the missionary organization that was at least in the forefront of one of the first great splits in the Restoration Movement. As the UCMS was the missionary organization, and as it had an increasingly denominational type focus, it began to become in conflict not only with some of the missionaries that were in the organization, but with some of the churches that were supporting them. And so the UCMS conflict back in the 50s, 1950s, was one of the things that brought to a head, the split that caused the separation of and the formation of the Disciples of Christ as a denomination, and then the independent churches of Christ and the non-instrumental churches of Christ. So missionary organizations have been a motive for debate. They have been questioned, but I want to make it clear, a missionary organization in and of itself is not wrong. Now, they'll point back to the Bible and Paul going out as a group and all that. And sure, he picked workers and he worked with them. But if you notice, he picked them from the places where he's working, the churches where he was working, the missionary churches, not back home. In fact, he started out with old Barnabas there, and they took off and, went out. And what happened? They had a big conflict and they split up. Didn't work. So, if anything, the biblical example is a group formed from your own culture and own people probably won't work. At least it didn't back then, and it often doesn't for us either. You probably can figure out my preference is direct support missions. Why? Because then the church that actually sends you out and pays the bill is your partner. They're part and parcel of your ministry. Now, I was reading the publicity material for one of the organizations in our brotherhood, and they said, we now have over 100 missionaries we've sent out. Well, in the end, they don't send out anybody because it's the churches that have to pay the bill. So there you have the churches supporting the missionaries, paying the bill, but they're no longer the people sending them out and having the authority over them. Where if you're direct support, the people send you out, they have the authority. All they have to do is say, we're going to quit supporting you. You're either going to do what they want to do or you're not going to be a missionary very long. It also gives an increased sense of ownership. They own me in a real sense because they send me out. Own me in the sense that they are true partners with me. And I try to make it a point when I speak about our mission work, I'll say we rather than me, because I know I'm doing it with those churches that send us out. And I'll say, if we have 50 baptisms in Colombia, those are baptisms of your church as much as they're my baptisms, and they're something we can all rejoice about. When things were very dangerous and very difficult in Colombia, boy, there's a lot of excitement there, sometimes way too much excitement. And yet, as I shared that back with the supporting churches and the churches put that out it brought that sense of excitement of preaching the gospel in a difficult and dangerous situation back home to the local church. And that excitement helped the local church as well. And so those are the advantages of going out in the direct support model. And then, of course, the avoidance of conflict. I mean, who you don't fight with yourself. There will be times when you don't get along with some of the nationals. That's just intercultural communications. But for the most part, you'll be able to work fine. And as Paul, picked Timothy and, some of these guys from the local churches where he's working, and he formed a group with them. They gave him cultural information, they gave him linguistic skills that he did not have, and they made it so he could work in a lot more areas. And certainly by working in Colombia and working in close association with the Colombian nationals, they have helped me to be able to adapt to Colombian culture, to be comfortable in Colombian culture, to be comfortable speaking Spanish. I mean, when I'm down there, especially these days, unless I have a work crew, I don't talk English, I don't read English, I don't think English. Everything I'm doing is in Spanish. Well, I might read a little bit if I'm reading a book or something that's not available in Spanish, but I do everything in Spanish. And I get back up here, and for a little while, I'm still thinking in Spanish. I'm not thinking in English. And I think maybe once or twice in this class, I started to say something, maybe threw in a Spanish word, because it's so much a part of me now. And with that, I become very comfortable in it. I don't have to work to speak Spanish. It doesn't tire me out to think in Spanish. I don't have to say, now, what did that guy say? I understand. In fact, if anything, I probably have a bigger vocabulary than a lot of them do, because I do a lot of reading in Spanish, anymore, as well as in English. And I can sit down and read a book in Spanish every bit as easily as I can read a book in English. Now, that wouldn't have happened if I'd been sitting around talking English with people, if I'd been, talking about American things, if I'd been sharing American interests. But I go to Colombia and I share their interest. I do what they do. I'm involved in activities with them. I talk to them. I bounce my ideas off of the elders down there, and I look for their approval. Do they think it's a good idea? Do they not think it's a good idea? If not, why? What's wrong with it? Could we improve it, or do we just need to dump it and go with something else? And in all of that, what they're doing is working as a filter for me to make sure that I'm not imposing American ideas and American ways of doing things onto them. Because if we do, that will guarantee that the church there will be an American implant, and as a result, it will not ever prosper. The churches that prosper all over the world are the churches that become truly indigenous. And if you ever want to have a prosperous and a successful missionary work, that's your only option. Now, how's that best going to happen? If you are intimately involved with them in every aspect of the evangelism, the church planning, the leadership training, all that, and taking their input as of significant importance to you. And the teams make that pretty hard to do if the predominance is Americans. That means you're going to have an American that's highly trained, that's been practicing it all their life, that they can do a very good job at, and the nationals cannot match up. It's just a fact. And if they can't match up, well, we'll let the Americans do it because they do it so much better than we do. But as long as the Americans are doing it, they never mature, they never grow, they never get any better. So these are all the issues that you have to deal with. And this conflict among missionaries deals with all these issues. How do we do all this? How do we accommodate the nationals? How do we work with them and all that? And somebody will say, we got to do everything. No, we want to do a little bit. We're going to do this ourselves. We do it better. And so that starts bringing about conflict. How do we interact with the national church? And everybody's going to have a different idea. And so that conflict among the missionaries and within a missionary organization is significant enough that it causes major attrition. And these are people that, had they gone out by themselves, they probably would have done fine. I'm just working with a young missionary couple that has recently come back. And they went to a country in Africa with an organization, and it was honeymoon for a while. Everything was great. But as they started working more and more in the actual ministry and the work, they started getting more and more friction. And they had some issues, family issues that dealt with health and a lot of complexity and things that were going on in their family that weren't indicative of any problem with them. It was just, that was what was happening. They went over there with kind of junior high age kids, and junior high junior high age kids are a problem anywhere in the world, and even more so in another culture. And they were trying to deal with that. And of course, they wanted to do what was right with their family. They wanted to help their children out and do everything. And they couldn't do what they thought they needed to do because somebody was saying, you've got to do this, you can't do that, you can only do the other. And it reached a point where they finally said, we've got to go home for a while. Well, you can't. You haven't been here the right number of years yet. Well, I'm sorry, we got to go. And there for a while, they were just going to quit and come home. Finally, the group relented and said, well, we'll give you like an emergency medical return, even though it wasn't purely medical. But I guess there's enough medical they could claim that. But that couple was on the verge of quitting, not because they didn't want to do the work, not because they hadn't been successful, not because they weren't learning the language and the culture. They were, but simply because they had these family issues that they were trying to deal with, and they didn't know what to do. They weren't successful. And they felt part of the problem was having these junior high age kids over in this foreign country and in sort of like a homeschool or group school or mission school setting, as opposed to the public schools that they'd been in back here and all of that. And so now they're back in the States and they're trying to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to go back and work with them again? Are we going to have to deal continually with somebody else trying to tell us what we have to do and what we cannot do and what is related to our family? Or can I do what I honestly feel I need to do as a father or as a mother, and what I should be doing and how I should be helping my kids? So that's the reason why this conflict comes about. Priority, spending money. Hey, I got a better idea how to spend your money than you do. Why don't you give me all your money and I'll spend it for you? That comes into play sometimes in this. So that's the reason we have these conflicts among missionaries who go out in an organization and all. As I say, I don't want to knock organizations. Some of them have made it possible to work in areas where you could not otherwise, because they do have the ability to go in and negotiate with the government and get permissions. So sometimes it is necessary. So if it is necessary, do it. If it isn't necessary, at least consider going out as an independent, direct support missionary. Now, you can work in companionship and fellowship as you're over there. That's okay. No problem with that. You're just not legally bound to have to do it the way somebody else tells you to do it. You can do it the way you feel the Lord is directing and the Lord is leading. Okay, as I said, that's a sticky issue. I tried to approach it as adroitly as possible and all. Now, in our next class session, we're going to get into more issues on a personal level, especially within the family, in the marriage unit. So we'll talk about that in the next class. Have a good day. We'll see you next class.